increase realness, as LEG would say, and turn to the dialectical reading of the Oresteia. There are 1,000 things I could say about Aeschylus, but I will spare them. Some of them I've already said. Got this text, dialectical reading of Aeschylus' Oresteia. Now, the context here is, in terms of the schedule, reading of Aeschylus' Oresteia, some context for Aeschylus. It's 458. Oh, this is good. This is good. You'll like this. This is the dates I was talking about yesterday. This is the right sequence. This is this. I mean, just to give you an idea of the time sequence here, because I find these things helpful. 458 BC is the Oresteia. 441, the Antigone. 399, death of Socrates. 390, Plato founds the Academy, and the first Oscars are presented. 367, Oscar for Best Picture is. In 367, Aristotle joins the Academy. Okay, very nice. If the Oresteia were performed in 1945, the Antigone would be produced in 1962. Death of Socrates in 2002. Founding of the Academy next year, 2012. And the Aristotle would join the Academy. Probably do that. 2035, is that right? Wow. The point being that the timeline is compressed, right? We're not talking about, because it can feel like centuries have passed here, but it's a compressed timeline. If we compare that to, say, the time that separates us from end of the Second World War. So the point being is that the transitions in the history of tragedy are fast, and the period of Athenian hegemony and the period of classical tragedy is a brief one. I won't say more about. There's just too much I could say about Aeschylus. The Oresteia as an introduction to Hegel, a dialectical reading of the Oresteia, what resists dialectics, the figure of Cassandra. I'm going to bunch all these things together. Euripides we can maybe pick up in discussion, but I'm going to go straight into the copy I prepared, and then I'll just, there's so much to say. A dialectical reading of Aeschylus is the Oresteia. By me. The major leitmotif of the Oresteia is we must suffer into truth. Tragedy is suffering into truth. That phrase is repeated repeatedly in the Oresteia. For those with sufficient memory or interest, it might be noticed that those words were repeated by Bobby Kennedy when, after the news of Martin Luther King's assassination reached him. Interesting. His response was to quote Aeschylus. They must suffer into truth. The question then is, why must we suffer in order to live in the truth? Open question. The theme of the Oresteia is justice, decay, what is right. Also the theme of Plato's Republic. This is scandalously minimal, but hopefully it will make a point. The first play, the Agamemnon, Clytemnestra, as a revenge for the unforgiven sacrifice of her daughter, Iphigenia, and in order to marry Aegisthus, kills Agamemnon and his captive concubine Cassandra. This is one account of justice. Clytemnestra is right to kill Agamemnon in order to avenge her daughter's sacrifice. So there's one order of justice. It is right for wives to avenge their husband's murder of their children. The flip side of that, another example from tragedy, is Medea. Medea, her husband, who's particularly incompetent, Jason, says, I found a new wife, but it's in the interest of the family. I've got, we better for all of us. And so she kills the kids. And fucks off to Athens. It's a magnificent moment. Second play, the libation bearers, the Koiphoroi. The play on which Nietzsche lectured on 6 or 7 occasions during his career, as a brief career as a professor of philology in Basel. It was an obsession of Nietzsche's. If you read the play, peculiar. It's a very sort of strange play, but there's lots of choral sequences which Nietzsche liked. Orestes, after meeting with his remaining sister Electra, and at the prompting of Apollo, backed up by Zeus, kills his mother Clytemnestra. This is a second account of justice. Orestes is right to avenge his father's murder. Right? So, his words are, his mother has bad dreams, and she has dreams that a snake is pulling at her breasts, at her nipples, and there's a mixture of milk and blood, and this is reported by the nurse. The nurse is always an odd figure in these tragedies, an important one. And when Orestes says to his mother, I want to butcher you. What he says, I want to butcher you. She says, this is the snake that I reared at my breast. And down she goes. He hesitates for a moment. He's confronted with the situation. Herzog, in that film, My son, what hast thou done? It's a reenactment of the libation bearers. And in the play, in the movie, you've got the acting out of they're doing a performance of the libation bearers, or maybe of the Orestes. Anyway. He hesitates for a second, and then he slaughters his mother. It's what Hamlet can't do. He's actually forbidden from doing it by the ghost they want to. But what's involved in killing your mother? Well, it's okay because the god says it's okay. Apollo. And it's not just Apollo. Apollo's backed up by Zeus, who is top god. As a consequence, two divine orders are in conflict. Right? So we have two actions. Clytemnestra's murder of Agamemnon, Orestes' murder of Clytemnestra. And two divine orders are in conflict. The first divine order are the Furies, who support Clytemnestra, for they avenge murder between family members. They are the ancient female divinities tied to earth and night. So note this, we've got the first divine order is the old gods. And the old gods are female gods, always in these plays, earth-related gods, and the female deity was Gaia, earth, which was female, and they're linked to night. The Furies. Two, the second divine order is Apollo, who sanctions Orestes' revenge, and Apollo is the new young male god, and his shrine is at Delphi, where the Eumenides, the third of the plays in the trilogy, opens. And Apollo is always identified with the light and the sun. Phoebus Apollo, bright Apollo. Right? Apollo is light. He is also part of a male line of divinities, beginning with Zeus and ending with Athena, a female born not from the womb of woman, but born directly from the head of her father, Zeus. Right? So what's going on in this sort of familial conflict is a cosmic conflict between two divine orders. One tied to earth, which is female, linked to the figure of night. One tied to the heavens, linked to the male divinity, and linked to the order of light. There's the tragic conflict. The resolution of the tragic conflict is achieved in the Eumenides, which in Greek means something like the kindly ones. Orestes goes to Athens to seek justice from Pallas Athena, protectress of the polis. Right? So what happens is that in the libation bearers is that once he slaughtered his mother, he begins to hallucinate. Well, he begins to see things. And it's not clear whether the hallucinations are shared or not, but let's say they're shared. And these creatures are the Furies. He flees to Delphi, shrine of Apollo, which is shrine sacred to his god Apollo. And he's surrounded by the sleeping Furies, but they can't get him because he's in the shrine of Apollo. Before they wake up, he escapes to Athens because he thinks he can seek justice in Athens with the god Athena, and the Furies pursue him. It's a real, Hollywood drama. This, how was this played out in that little theatre I showed you on the phone yesterday, and what sort of imagination was required. You can imagine this as the Outlaw Star as a cartoon, really. It would work, I think, brilliantly well. The action moves from Apollo's shrine to the Acropolis, high city, to the Areopagus, the hill of Ares, god of war, Mars. The seat of justice for the Athenians, the supreme court, actually, for the Athenians. 10 citizens of Athens are chosen to give the verdict in the trial between the two parties of Orestes and the Furies. Athena reconciles the two pleas for justice in the two divine orders. She discovers the mean between the opposed positions. The votes are equal, but she decides in favour of Orestes because she accepts the male principle. I will cast my lot for you. No mother gave me birth. I honour the male in all things but marriage. Athena doesn't get married. Orestes is acquitted. I'm setting this up as like a certain way of reading, the classical way of reading the Oresteia. Same. I think it's problematic what I'm saying here. It's just a summary. in order to introduce a certain structure, a dialectical structure. Athena then invokes persuasion, pitho, a constant and shifting theme in the Oresteia. This is the Fegel's translation. Persuasion, the maddening child of ruin, arte. I could talk for hours about arte, but we'll save that. And appeases the furious furies. They become the Eumenides, the gracious ones, the protectresses of the polis. They agree to Athena's persuasion with a yes. So this is how we read this play dialectically in a rather straightforward way. So the two claims for justice are reconciled into the political order of Athens. Together they form the mean between the extremes of anarchy and tyranny, the combination between reverence for law and fear, or legality and terror that Athena proposes. The bit I quoted before, neither anarchy nor tyranny, my people worship the mean. I urge you, shore it up with reverence and never banish terror from the gates. Right? So the function of the Furies becomes that, if you like, internalized former enemy, which can be the guarantee of the potential of terror in the state. Right? So that the Furies ruled by fear, but they're kindly ones. They're also going to protect the city. The Oresteia is a political tragedy. It is tragedy as an act of political reconciliation between opposed counterclaims. The Hegelian thought, which is why I'm setting up in this way, the Hegelian thought would be that tragedy is the agon, the conflict between opposed yet mutually justified claims for justice. And the work of tragedy is the sublation, Aufhebung, of this conflict, where the terms of the opposition are annulled, raised up and conserved. Right? So, on this view, I mean, again, just to reiterate, which can be, should be complicated. I'm doing it as a sort of picture. Right? We have Orestes here, backed up by his gods. We have Clytemnestra here, backed up by his gods. The play consists in a conflict between these two claims to what is right, and the third play allows for a reconciliation of these two claims in the political form of the city, which both embodies the principle of Orestes, namely the Apollonian principle. Athens is the city of Athena. Athens in Greek is called Athena, and also embodies the Clytemnestra in the person of the Furies. So this idea of dialectics as conflict between opposed yet mutually justified claims, which is then aufgehoben, as Hegel will say, raised up, sublated into a high unity, and then it moves on. And the high unity here is the political unity of the city-state. Right, same structure in, if you're familiar with any sort of, 101 versions of Hegel, the philosophy of right of Hegel is based on the opposition, or at least the tension between family and civil society, which is then sublated and maintained in the form of the state. Right? And Hegel gives an analysis of the Oresteia in an important essay on natural law in 1803, 1804. I'll say more about Hegel. This is just a sort of a way in. After the reconciliation and the trial on the Areopagus, the audience, the citizens, are led from the theatre in a torchlight procession through the city. In the final lines of the play, the women of the city say that this peace between Athena's people and their guests, I think the Greek there is metiki, foreigners, metics, must never end. All-seeing Zeus, the Apollonian principle, and fate, the principle of the Furies, embrace. Down they come to urge our union on, cry in triumph, carry the dancing on and on. What embraces here is the Apollonian Zeus, Athena, Apollo, the new gods, masculinity, Orestes, all those things are in a chain there, and the Dionysian, the Furies, the old gods, femininity. We've not talked about Cassandra and Clytemnestra. In Nietzsche's words, Apollo and Dionysus are coupled. Is this perhaps why, looking back at the birth of tragedy from the lucid mania at Ecce Homo, Nietzsche calls the book offensively Hegelian? So, I'm conflating together two things. I'm going to deepen this thought as we try and look at Hegel's theory of the tragic. This is like a sort of slightly idiotic way in, but it's important. I think it's helpful maybe. Tragedy is the reconciliation between opposed, mutually justified claims to justice, and the goal of tragedy is reconciliation. If you read, the second thing is, if you read The Birth of Tragedy by Nietzsche, he says something like, from memory, oh God, I can't remember, but something like the Greeks had two art impulses. The Apollonian had two art impulses that they embodied with the person of their gods, Apollo and Dionysus. Apollo is the god of the plastic arts, sculpture, statues. Dionysus is the god of music. Right? And the relationship between these two gods is a relationship of strife and periodic coupling, union. And the coupling of Apollo and Dionysus leads to that miracle of the Hellenic will. This is a quote, Attic tragedy. So when Nietzsche's looking back from the late 1880s on his early work and thinks he says it's offensively Hegelian. Not that he read Hegel, didn't have to, you just smell it, just smelled like Hegel. It was, so there we go. Metacritic. This is adapted from a text I wrote for a show, actually I co-wrote with my wife. Someone's lifting this. It's on at the Guggenheim in Bilbao at the moment, I believe. I've not seen it. Dialectics is a smooth three-stroke motor that moves effortlessly at the speed of history without stalling or breaking down. As with Hendrick's watch, it's a wonderful piece of Greco-German conceptual engineering that aims at the totalization of historical experience. In dialectics, there is no interval, luminous or otherwise. There is just a transition from one shape of spirit to another. Dialectics is all about transitions, right? And you've got to be, Hegel's like, this sounds stupid, but no, what can I say? It's about transitions. Once you get the rhythm of the transitions in Hegel, you can learn to read it. And the way to read Hegel is to read Hegel very fast, right? Seriously, don't, because if you read it sentence by sentence, it's never going to happen. You've got to go quickly and get the sort of rhythm of it. And Hegel's genius is the rhythm of transition. Suddenly something will look like that, and he'll shift it, turn the thing around. That's dialectical thinking, that inversion. And it's better to read it. It says read it without understanding it in a strange way. I think there's a truth to that. If you go sentence by sentence, you're never going to get it. I have enormous difficulty reading the phenomenology of spirit. Transitions. The exemplar and basis by dialectical thinking is a certain Hegelian understanding of ancient Greek tragedy. On this view, tragedy is dialectical and dialectics is tragic. This is a thesis I could develop, and I'll talk about this maybe a little bit later, but this is a speculation. Right? What is dialectical thinking? Well, Socrates had a sense of dialectics, but in my humble opinion, and we'll see this in more detail tomorrow, in the 1790s in Germany, as a consequence of a whole number of factors which come together, there is this is what's so amazing, right? That we if you know this, then excuse my going on about it, mentioning it. But you know, Schelling, Hegel, and Hölderlin were students together in a theological seminary in Tübingen, right? Roommates, effectively. Right? And something went on with tragedy between the three of them, right? The details of it are still fairly, we don't know for sure. And in 1795, which the text will look at tomorrow, Schelling develops a theory of the tragic. And Hölderlin, as I mentioned, in the late 1790s, tries to write a tragedy on the Greek model and fails. Hegel, I think, takes the conflictual, oppositional form of thinking that is tragic thinking, and that then becomes dialectics, right? And that eventually becomes the whole logic of history for Hegel, which maybe is going too far, right? But the point being is that tragedy is dialectical. It's a relationship between opposed claims which enter into conflict and then become reconciled and move on. And dialectics is a tragic structure. For Hegel, as we'll see, tragedy is always overcome by comedy. Right? Meaning that, and the ultimate comedy for Hegel is the comedy that is philosophy. Right? Dialectics gives us a procedure for thinking that shows that ultimately the tragic way of thinking has to be overcome in the ascent towards what Hegel calls absolute knowing. Now, you can read Hegel without absolute knowing, right? If you're Zizek or if you're Adorno. But he does talk about it. But where is the interval in dialectics? The response is one word: woman. Of course, Hegel knew this. In his reading of Sophocles' Antigone, he writes, "Woman is the eternal irony of the community." Thinking of Antigone, particularly. The Oresteia is about the sublation of this eternal irony in the form of the state, which alternatively might be viewed as a dramatic apologia for patriarchy. The dialectical machine of tragic justice concludes by buying off the feminine principle, the Furies, incorporating and subordinating it to the masculine principle that governs the polis. This is how I mentioned Christoph. Did I mention Christoph Wolff? Yeah. Christoph Wolff, very important. But I reread her work recently. It was just strangely dated. It's so important. East German writer. Anyway, she writes a book called Cassandra. A series of lectures given in Frankfurt in the 1970s, and publishes a book called Cassandra, together with a kind of travelogue fiction called Cassandra. Here's another way of understanding ancient tragedy. It's what's called the Bach-Orphan thesis. Right? And the Bach-Orphan thesis, based on the work of Bach-Orphan, is a 19th century claim that when they discovered Troy, what they discovered in the discovery of Troy was a society that was a matriarchy. Right? Troy was a matriarchy where priestesses held the highest function, highest role. Cassandra, princess, priestess, in Troy, is abducted by Agamemnon, imperial invader from Athens, raped, and then abducted and taken back to Argos as booty in all senses of the word booty, right? In the Beyonce sense of the word booty. She's going to be kept as a concubine. Cassandra, who is Cassandra? Cassandra is priestess, princess. She is the victim of rape, not just by the Greeks. Before the Greeks, she was raped by the god Apollo, right? Who takes the form of something or other. A swan? Probably a swan. Something. Gods are always taking forms and raping. But, so she's being raped, and at the moment of whatever the delicate expression would be, the appropriate expression, at the moment of, I don't know, coition or something, she repels the god's advances. So the act is interrupted. And as a punishment for that, the god gives her the gift of prophecy, but it's a prophecy in which no one will believe. Right? So Cassandra sees the future, but nobody believes the future that she sees. And that's her curse. So she turns up in the Oresteia, and there's no reason dramatically why Cassandra should be in the Oresteia, as this booty, and is teased by Clytemnestra, sort of abused by Clytemnestra, and then Agamemnon. It's an extraordinary moment in the Agamemnon. Agamemnon, they lay out a red carpet for Agamemnon. Clytemnestra says, "So pleased that you're back. It's been 10, 12 years, the war. You've won the war. Fantastic, just come into the palace and I'll she lays out a crimson carpet for him. And he says, what, do you think I'm some peacock, from Asia? Who's going to wander in like this? I don't need a carpet. And then he gets a sense of perhaps what's going down. And he takes his boots off. Right? Extraordinary, he takes his boots, like a Beckett moment. Takes his boots off and goes into the palace and she slaughters him. Right? Not immediately, but after a few minutes. Cassandra's outside in the chariot, the Ekuklema, and she sees the whole thing coming. And she explains to the chorus what's happening. So Cassandra has direct premonitions of the future, but nobody believes the future that she sees. If you get a chance, if you read the Oresteia, you know what I'm talking about. But if you don't, if you get a chance tonight, just read the passages where Cassandra erupts. It's about halfway through the Agamemnon. The Clytemnestra abuses her. She goes into the palace to do her husband. Cassandra's then teased by the chorus, and then eventually she erupts with this "Aye!" Which is what you did in tragedy, was this "Aye!" And she begins to babble, and they're not sure she speaks Greek. There's this whole problem of language, which is interesting. It keeps appearing in who speaks Greek. And she has a vision of the murder and a vision of her rape by the god. And so what we see in Cassandra is, this, repetition compulsion. She's repeating the origin of the trauma that she was subjected to, and at the same time she's having a vision of her own slaughter at the hands of Clytemnestra. And it's the most amazing moment, I think. Amazing moment. And eventually the chorus understand, they sort of get it. Clytemnestra comes back out and she's led into what she calls the slaughterhouse. Right? I will go into the slaughterhouse, and she's slaughtered. Right? Now, Christoph's claim is that Cassandra is the memory of an alternative way of ordering the city. Right? An ordering of the city around the female principle. Now, whether this is right or wrong, I don't know. But on that view, what's going on in Greek tragedy is the assimilation of the female, or the assimilation of the female order, which is represented by the Furies and by the Furies, into the patriarchal order of the city. So, what is Greek civilization on that view? Greek civilization, glorified in Greek tragedy and philosophy and all the rest, is the establishment of patriarchy. Right? And so what the Trojan War is all about is sex war. Right? Sex war where the men win, obviously. Christoph uses that, and it's really worth looking at. But, well, maybe it's not, it's a bit dated, but the argument's really interesting.
She's given a fair alternative, Cassandra does, and the thing that's in that novel, which is to live, to leave, and to live.
All right.
She doesn't, obviously,
she
to die, to kill, or to live.
Yeah. I mean, the figure that most interests me, confuses me in all of these tragedies is the figure of the foreign woman. Right?
Yeah.
What are these foreign women doing in tragedy? What's going on? And they're all over the place, and it's just not clear. There are foreign men as well, but there are more. And again, it's a situation of war, and what happens in war is rape and abduction. Right? That's what war's about. You win a war, you bring back concubines, or you keep a separate family. So these great Greek heroes have got their family back, like Ajax, Sophocles' Ajax. He's got the family back in Greece. He's got a separate family out in the field who are doing everything for him, and they're metics, they're barbarians. So there's this whole negotiation with the non-Greek, which is so interesting to just ponder and think it through. So, going back to the text, as it were, the Oresteia on that view is about the sublation of the eternal irony that is woman, on Hegel's view, into the form of the state or the city. The Antigone, by contrast, is about the dissolution of the state when the mutually justified opposed principles which sustain it are not respected and the political order disintegrates. Hegel uses the eternal irony of Antigone in order to explain the transition from the order of ancient Greek ethical life, or what he calls Sittlichkeit, to the next shape of spirit, namely Roman law. So, Hegel uses the example of tragedies in very strategic ways. The Antigone, on his reading, ends with civil war. Right? It ends with the dissolution of the city-state, and therefore the form of spirit, as Hegel calls it, which was Greek ethical life, dissolves, and the next form of spirit has to appear. And the next form of spirit, in Hegel's progressive conception of history, is Roman law. Right? If you read, this is in chapter 6 of Phenomenology of Spirit, and it's great stuff. But what if woman were an irony that could not be sublated dialectically into the movement of history? What if woman were an interval that was not simply a pause between two strokes of the dialectical machine? What if she were the eternal spanner in the works, the indigestible bolus that sticks in the throat and makes the system vomit? I'm thinking here of Bataille. Bataille is always after what makes the system vomit, at that moment of disgust or ejection or detritus that can't be internalized. Bataille is always interested in those moments that cannot be systematized, right? And which he calls the sovereign. sovereignty. The erotic, laughter, all that great stuff he writes about. That's me and my wife, strange thing to say in these circumstances. I don't know why it's... but this isn't me, this is both of us. We think this is an extremely plausible way of understanding female characters in Greek tragedy. Clytemnestra, Cassandra, Phaedra, Electra, Antigone, and the rest are non-dialecticizable remainders, material traces in the spiritual process and relate as progress of dialectical history. That's a claim. And we're close here to introduce another voice into this. Derrida's claim in Glas, his text from 1974, that Antigone is the quasi-transcendental in Hegel's phenomenology. Namely, she is that which must be killed in order for the dialectical motor to keep running. But on the other hand, she is that which stalls the dialectical machine, a kind of abyss or crypt within the movement of dialectics, a corpse that we keep tripping over in the night kitchen of history. The last sentence is nice, isn't it? But see, to introduce another, it wasn't bad enough as it is. I mean, what I've tried to present is a crude dialectical understanding of the Oresteia, and then how that might be complicated or interrupted. The person I've introduced there is Derrida, and Derrida's interesting for all sorts of reasons. But when he reads the figure of Antigone in his book Glas, he identifies her as that being that puts a spoke in the wheel of dialectics, and a spoke in the motor of history, that sort of stalls it, makes it stop. And which means that he describes her as a kind of abyss, a kind of crypt, right? Crypt, both in the sense of a tomb, right? She's buried. Antigone's buried in a tomb, right? And then she hangs herself. And a crypt in the sense of a cipher, something cryptic, something secret. Right? And that's the Oresteia, certain interpretation. That was something concrete with notes, wasn't it? But and then we're gonna get into Hegel properly. But that was a first pass of it. The order of the state, the order of the city, is the legal order of the city. This goes back to a point I was making in relationship to John's question yesterday. The order of the city, the legal order of the city is based on a history of violence. Right? It's based on the memory of violence, and tragedy becomes the archive for the violence that constitutes who we are. It's sort of interesting, right? I mean, why do you need? I mean, if it sort of complicates Christovol's claim that if tragedy is that, if tragedy is has this ideological political function, why does the polity need to be reminded of the history of violence that is its foundation?
To prove the law.
To prove the law. To prove the law.
Prove the rules.
Yes. But there are plenty of examples of polities that constitute themselves through a claim to legitimacy which ignores the history of violence that is their foundation. Think of the American Republic, right? When was it? The 4th century, the 400th anniversary of Jamestown in 1607, right? The statistic that really killed me was that Jamestown was founded in 1607, and the first slave ships were about 1619. It took 12 years to work out, how this was going to be, how this project was going to be worked out. So in that sense, it's based on a history of art, but that is not necessarily the history that would be the official archive of the state's legitimacy. Right? You could describe it as the United States is a heroic act of revolutionary war against a colonial power, Great Britain. Right? Or again, the point I'm trying to make is that there's something, or it could be, in the case of Serbia, right? It's a history of violence based upon an act of defeat, right? The Battle of Kosovo, and through that defeat, a vindication of who one is and what one is meant to be defending. Right? So like a negative use of violence. We are victims of history, and that's our justification. Right? There are ways of conceiving different histories on that model. Right? A certain, you can imagine that in the case of, say, a certain narrative of Irishness would have that. Right? Irishness is the memory of a history of violence as victimization, right? Which then justifies. It may justify violence, it may justify the legal regime of the state. But with the Greeks, it's their own, it's what's being memorialized is themselves as victors. That's what's interesting. Right? It's the archive of violence that makes them who they are. Right? And they're recognizing, as it were, almost the crypt that's within them, the dead that were buried in some way. I don't know.
So if there is violence in the past, so there was an enemy too.
Yeah.
And somehow I have trouble to accept this conception that that political is based on the exception or the kind of enemy, because if maybe in the past it was like that, but if we consider that we are today living in a kind of globalized world, the kind of differences are annihilated, and I have impression that these differences and these enemies are producing by kind of political elites, and they are existing, to just kind of to prove kind of political gain. And I have impression that real politics actually really doesn't consider these kind of differences. For example, I saw in the United Nations meeting where they bring the decision about intervention in Libya. U.S. representative was the Arabian-looking girl, or U.S. Ambassador in China is a Chinese-looking guy.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, let's say, dangerous politics. We are like you. We are not the other. We are you. I have impression that these differences are just kind of today, in today's globalized world, just part of kind of political marketing, and that really doesn't exist. We are all
Good point.
the same.
It's a good point. What do we think of that? Let's discuss that. Because the claim I was making, politics is based upon a logic of the enemy. It's that which constitutes identity and us, and often in relation to some idealized image of the past or whatever. You're saying globalization changes that. Globalization is the formation of political elites where differences disappear, and as a consequence there is no enemy. What do we think of that?
I would respond maybe a little bit, I don't know if this is getting at what you're getting at, but if we think about the difference of globalization today as opposed to in previous times, like you said, it's always been going on, that within the globalization today we're dealing within a structure, especially within the concept of the United Nations, which was trying to predicate itself on a sort of global city, if you will, a global structure where we're all part of the same polis, if you will. And today, especially with how media functions, more and more, with the instantaneity of movement of goods, services, and the reliance on other countries for each other's services, it's now more than ever we realize how much connected we are, that perhaps there's a point to be made that we're entering into a different sort of polis where how do we find the exception to create this law when we don't really know the law of the new global city itself?
What is a professor at this institution, Giorgio Agamben, going to say about that?
Well, I think he'd say that we're all in the position of the state of exception.
Yeah.
Well, but
Generalization of the exception.
That's true, but and there's a series of books along those lines. But recently we had translations of nudities, and one in the coming community is the first, which is the alternative to those dark views of politics. And potentialities is no. There's another book. I can't think of the title of it.
What, recent translation of Agamben?
Recent translation. Oh my God! It was published by Zone.
Oh yes.
The signature.
Signatures.
Yeah, there's that, but
Signature.
there's another one, which is the book to look at.
The Open?
I'm sorry?
The Open? Man and Animal?
No. I'm sorry, I can't think of the title.
It's one on sacrament.
But it's an incredibly powerful book. The essays are really brief. Towards the end, two of the essays are. And they're very hard to read because they don't follow basic logic. Okay.
Right.
There's a kind of paralogic. And the reviewers who have tried to deal with the books to introduce them to people who might be interested are saying the style here is pretty much everything. None of the reviewers that I have read, God, I'm sorry, I can,
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
it's in the book right now that's in production.
Somebody go online and work.
Yeah, I'm going
Is it,
Yeah, see
what
what
is an apparatus?
What is it?
We're connected here.
When we get back, I can find it because it's a major text.
But it seems like we're talking about borders and
Mhm.
nations and I'm not talking about that. But
They're talking about
okay, because I mean it's more like to say Obama's the main character would be wrong. You know, so many politicians vote a certain way to more and more privatize healthcare, etc. for kickbacks. You know, it's all economics and it's all about real estate and where you can get something made cheaper. So it's like, you know, the tyrant or the main character isn't even really deciding or yeah.
I would ask you, I would advise you, I would suggest that I don't have it in my head, it's been a few years since I looked at it, but we considered the last page of Carl Schmitt's Concept of the Political. It's brilliant, because Schmitt, writing in the, 32, that text or something, says that the problem with liberalism, the problem with what he calls liberalism, is depoliticization. Right? We don't live in political orders. The political order is gone. What Schmitt likes was the old European legal order, the legal order of of states who were independent states that were in a relationship of conflict, war, and commerce, which was somehow productive, right? Britain, France, Germany, whatever it might be. That's with the end of the First World War. Schmitt says in the developments, in particular in Germany, that's collapsed. And it's collapsed into a general politicization. Sorry, general depoliticization. So the political, on Schmitt's view, disappears in our so-called modern globalized world. So your view is consistent with that. And what replaces it are a system of political elites. True, but Schmitt also says, and this is something which has just been confirmed, the issue, liberalism, by which Schmitt means liberal democracy, is an order based upon the extension. So if we have the political here, right, and much of what we've said today is about the political and friend-enemy and blah 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 and tragedy. What happens in liberalism is the elimination of the political and the elevation of two opposed spheres, one of which is above it and one of which is below it. What's above it is ethics, what's below it is economics. Right? The socio-economic realm. In our world, capitalism as a mode of production. And capitalism as a mode of production finds its discourse of legitimation, right, in ethics. And for Schmitt, the incarnation of such an ethics would be institutions like the UN. The UN is not a political organisation, it's essentially a moral organisation that tries to govern over an essentially economic set of apparatus. What's been elided in that is any idea of the political. Right? Hannah Arendt has a very similar story with a bit less drama. Indeed, they both taught at the New School. We tend to forget. Not Schmitt, sorry. Schmitt didn't teach at the New School. I was thinking of Strauss for a second. Teaching for 5.5 hours a day. But in this order, right, if the enemy here, let's say the enemy of the Athenian is the Persian, right? The enemy of the Englishman is the Spaniard. And that's clear. And the enemy has to be defeated, but not necessarily eliminated, and respected. Right? This is key. In that speech from Cromwell that I mentioned before, the Englishman requires the Spaniard in order to become the Englishman. Right? And the Spaniard is accorded the respect of a political enemy. Right? It's not personal, it's business, as it were. It's not personal. I kill you, but it's, or I don't kill you. A lot of wars in antiquity didn't involve huge amounts of death. What happens in our globalized modern world, I use that in quotation marks because it's a complicated issue, is that the enemy becomes the outlaw of humanity. Right? The category that's then mobilized as an ethical category is the category of humanity. Right? And the interests of the socio-economic order are justified through appeals to a universal order whose name is humanity. Right? Radko Mladic, who was just defending his people and his country, as he said today, and he said today, I find these claims that are being made against me monstrous. That's what he said. It's amazing, right? It's going to be a very strange trial. Mladic has a clear, if like a classical idea of the enemy. Right? we might think of him as a monster, but he's not a classical idea. He's being taken to the Hague and tried with crimes against humanity. Right? A legal category that was invented when? I mean, it's recent. End of the Second World War. Nuremberg, it might even be, are the Nuremberg trials crimes against humanity, or is that the Barbie trial in the 80s? When was that term actually introduced into?
Was that in Israel when they had the post the
It's
Nazi
not
trials?
Nuremberg, it's like.
It's later than Nuremberg. I think it's the Barbie trial. Klaus Barbie, the Nazi. It was about the French. It was in the case that was defended by that extraordinary guy Jacques Vergès, the French lawyer. And I believe it's a category from the 1980s. But here we have it: crimes against humanity. Therefore, the enemy is the enemy is the outlaw. The enemy is the inhuman. Right? The enemy becomes the inhuman. Therefore, what rights does one accord to the inhuman? None. They can just be killed. Right? There's no issue. So, I mean, you're right. You know, when this conception of the political dissolves, we end up in a different situation, which is a much more brutal situation, where we discover, as you know, arguably was the consequence of the so-called war on terror, that people can randomly be extinguished because they're not even human beings. Right? They don't qualify. So the enemy, it's not the enemy disappears, but the enemy becomes the inhuman at some level. And obviously, you know, Agamben's work is about the way, in a sense, the political and legal regimes of the modern period, through colonialism, British colonialism, French colonialism, and all that National Socialism was the extension of the logic of British colonialism in particular. That's where the concentration camp as a state of exception begins, right? It's in the Boer War in the early 20th century. And there's a fantastic book. I mean, fantastic book. I can't recommend it strongly enough. By someone called Sven Lindqvist. Have you heard of this? Lindqvist. So it's that strange Swedish Qvist. It's called Exterminate All the Brutes. Exterminate All the Brutes. I recommend it. It's a beautifully written book. Exterminate All the Brutes. It's another book by Lindqvist called A History of Bombing, which is just fantastic, which is a history of bombing, right? Sven Lindqvist. Read it. Exterminate All the Brutes is the when Kurtz. Yeah. When what's the guy's? Not Kurtz is the Kurtz is Brando. But I mean the Marlowe. Is it Marlowe goes after Kurtz in Conrad's Heart of Darkness, and goes over the words that are found inscribed on a piece of wood, I think, or exterminate all the brutes. Right? Kurtz, you know, goes mad or whatever. What Lindqvist tries to show is that the deep legal logic of the concentration camp of the Holocaust was the extension of the logic of colonialism. Right? The Germans just wanted their colonies. Right? The British and the French had carved up the world in their interests, and the same logic could be applied to Eastern Europe and the extension of Lebensraum and all that stuff. So the idea of Holocaust as novum, right, as something innovative, the idea of Holocaust as absolute break in history is, I think, another dramatic historical falsification. The Holocaust is the extension, this would be Adorno's thesis, I take it. It would be Adorno's thesis, it's implicit in negative dialectics, is the extension of the logic of modernity, the deep social, legal, political logic of the modern world, whose consequence is extermination.
Okay, man. Now, these books are very, very powerful, but there's another Agamba, okay? And the book I couldn't remember is Profanations. That's the sacred. There is the profane, okay, which is fundamentally different, okay? And in the series of books are Coming Community, Potentialities, which is really not, Homo Sacer is predicated on Aristotle's notion of politics, okay, clearly. And the Potentialities appears to be based on Aristotle, but Aristotle makes a passing reference to adunamis, impotentiality, okay? But he doesn't develop it, but the Agamba does develop it. And it's incredibly liberating from this kind of thinking here, okay? So Profanations is the book that you really need to get. And Nudities as well, okay? He's really writing some dangerous stuff here. Easily appropriated, okay, to say something else. And then the earlier book, Language of Death, as well, and The Coming Community. They all go together, and they're the antithesis to this, right here.
So Victor, what would you say Agamba would say to Daniel's question?
I don't know. But the globalization argument, I wouldn't presume to speak for Giorgio. Globalization is...
Let's pretend you can. Let's just, it's late, just make stuff up.
Go for profanation.
No, but then
Go for what is basically illegal thinking. Okay.
No, but another book which appeared in the last couple of years, and we had some of them over in New York a month ago. It was extremely strange and good fun. Is the Tikkun group that we smuggled through them into the country. Anyway, it's interesting. We'll talk about that over dinner or something. But a book like The Coming Insurrection by the Invisible Committee kicks off from this Agambenian picture, this sort of picture. This is what they call empire. No? That's empire. Liberal democracy is groomed from the start. What do we do? Well, secession and sabotage are two suggestions. Withdrawal, the establishment of forms of communism, and then a program of sabotage against the machine, as they would call it, the imperial machine, which is why some of those people were arrested in late 2008 and charged with the Philip K. Dick-like crime of pre-terrorism. Not pre-crime, but pre-terrorism. What was it? Pré-terrorism. Right? Invention of a legal category. Astonishing. Sarkozy, who says the Sarkozy's government have got no imagination? They invented a legal category, and the people were released, but still some of them are under, there are problems for them. But, and the coming insurrection is